Welcome, everybody. I'm first just going to make sure you all have your cell phones off. And I apologize, it's a little hot in here. The air is great out in the lobby, but it's a little bit warm in here. But I think we'll overcome it. Our speaker tonight will carry us through it. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ellen de St. Phal, Director of Community Relations here at Concordia. And I am delighted to welcome you to our 2013 fall season of Books and Coffee. And before I get started, I want to thank Alice Neal, our Bronxville neighbor and Concordia friend, who made this wonderful connection for us tonight. And it's because of these community connections that we are able to have such wonderful speakers here. So I want to thank her, and I'd like to also thank the Friends of Concordia, whose support makes these programs possible. And I don't know what I think about my microphone, but anyway. And now for our special guest. I'm honored to welcome author Peter Georgescu to Concordia. Mr. Georgescu's story embodies the American dream. After surviving the atrocities of a labor camp in Romania, he immigrated to America at 15. With no understanding of the English language, he went on to graduate from Exeter Academy, Princeton, and Stanford universities. He then joined Young and Rubicon and rose through the ranks to become chairman and CEO. He was inducted into the Advertising Hall of Fame and has received several honorary degrees and served on the boards of several public companies and nonprofit organizations, including his current role as Vice President of New York Presbyterian Hospital. A remarkable life. But what makes Mr. Georgescu's life extraordinary is not only his academic and professional successes, but also his resilience and, to use his term, his intellectual humility. His book, The Constant Choice, An Everyday Journey from Evil Toward Good, reveals his personal quest to find the true meaning of goodness in human life. His reflections are honest, thoughtful, and thought-provoking. I am both humbled and inspired by his compassion and capacity for forgiveness. And I'm not alone in my praise for his book. Others have proclaimed it inspiring and provocative, prompting in-depth discussions about good and evil, faith and belief, and the purpose of our lives on earth. Among his many reflections in his book, he cites T.S. Eliot. But reading The Constant Choice, I found myself thinking of Seamus Heaney, another great contemplator of good and evil in everyday life. And I will quote from Mr. Heaney's poem, Voices from Lemnos. Human beings suffer. They torture one another, they get hurt and get hard. No poem or play or song can fully right a wrong, inflicted or endured. History says, don't hope on this side of the grave, but then once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme. I would say The Constant Choice is part of that longed-for tidal wave, and in Mr. Georgescu's remarkable story, hope and history do rhyme. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Georgescu.
Well, Ellen, thank you so much. That was absolutely lovely. This must be a college campus that was erudite and thoughtful and very kind, and I hope that we can have a dialogue at the end of this evening, and we'll see where we go into this session together. So I really greatly appreciate those very kind and very thoughtful words, Ellen. Now, as I start, I wanted to have a little bit of an acknowledgement, a little bit of a confession. You see, you have before you an immigrant. And I know we're all immigrants at one point or another in our lives, but perhaps I'm a little bit different than many of you because I happen to be an immigrant who came off the boat. And at the same time, I'm also a very typical immigrant because I always wanted to belong to this country, as many immigrants do. You know, I wanted to live by the extraordinary values and precious freedoms that this country possesses, unlike almost nothing else in the world. I wanted to be a good citizen. So yes, I care about America, which is now my country, adopted country, and it is my home. It is a nation I love and adore deeply. And you will hear shortly that it is in fact the people of America who saved my life. Yet, for the last decade or so, it has become rather clear to me that the challenges that this country faces have become enormous, complex, and difficult. So, part of what I want to chat about today as a reason for writing the book is that I'm worried. I'm worried about the zeitgeist. I'm worried about our culture. I'm worried, more worried, I would say, than perhaps I have ever been in my life. And I'm worried because too many of our actions, too much of our culture reflect the narcissistic, self-centered, the entitled side of our natures. So I wrote this constant choice because I've been troubled by too many Bernie Madoffs in our society. And I wrote this book because of the greed and fraud and narcissism that helped lead to the 2008 financial crisis, where millions of people lost their jobs, and now, almost 6 years later, millions still don't have the ability to earn a living. I wrote this book because of this kind of greed and narcissism, coupled with many unwise political decisions, not just recently, but over the last 30 to 40 years, and turbocharged by the forces, powerful forces of globalization and technology and their complexities, have resulted in a big problem for our nation. Together, all of these events have helped create a vast and growing divide between some 15% or so of our wealthier citizens and the vast majority of the hard-working folks. This chasm is immense and has created an economic, social, and cultural caste system which is almost impossible to bridge. Nobel Prize economist Joseph Stiglitz stated that 4 out of 5 Americans will experience some form of poverty in their lifetime. I think this is a train wreck in the making. The gap is both morally wrong and unsustainable. History has been brutally unkind when the disparity between the rich and the less fortunate grows too large. You can go back to the French Revolution or a good part of the Arab Spring that we've witnessed in the last bunch of years, the Occupy movement that we witnessed 2 years ago, the recent unrest in Brazil, are all consequences of the disparity when it gets too large. And arguably, this is the most consequential issue facing our nation today. I also wrote this book because I've been bothered by the lying and distortions and deceptions in our political system. We witnessed all of that in last year's elections. And today we have a dysfunctional tribal warfare and gridlock in Washington. I did this because there's too much money slushing around our politics and politicians. The 2012 election cost us some $7 billion. It was about 350% more than we spent a couple of decades ago. And here are a couple of interesting facts, troubling facts. Only 630 people accounted for 98% of all the money that was declared supporting super PACs, and that's over $3 billion. And the percentage of the US population, take all of us all together, who contributed $200 or more towards political campaign was a whopping 0.3%. So I'm afraid that we are in a realm on both parties of political corruption. We're becoming increasingly like the banana republics we used to deride just south of the borders some years ago. And finally, I wrote this book because of the 46 senators from both parties who managed to vote against common sense, the common good, the will of the people, demanding background checks to prevent criminals and the mentally ill from acquiring guns. And just this week, of course, we were once again served with a horrifying reminder in the Washington Naval compound. And Dr. Janice Orlowski, she is the Chief Medical Officer of the Washington Hospital Trauma Center. And she received the injured and the dead. And she was quoted saying, and we heard it on television, by saying there's something evilish in the sickness happening in America. We must all work together across the country to end this evil. So it all kind of led me to think, and it does lead me to say, don't we wish, we all want to say tilt enough to all of this, that this behavior is really unacceptable, that we must stop such outrageous deeds. Yet there's another problem that we have to overcome. There's a general sense of apathy in today's world, in our world. We simply accept this behavior as if it is a natural part of us as humans, and that there's nothing we can do about it. And that's a troubling fact. Too many of us seem comfortable to shrug our shoulders, to turn our heads, and let these bad actors carry on their nasty, evil deeds. Which brings me to ask the question, for me, what is evil? So here's my definition. I went to the most profound source you can find in today's world, my iPhone. And it says very simply that evil deeds are deeds that harm other people. And I hasten to add, without fair and reasonable justification, as in a just war or self-defense. Now, to grasp the very essence of evil, its source and the power it has in this world, does require to dive a little bit deeper into the human condition. And you know, I had significant advantages in my life's journey to help me understand human nature. I've had a privilege, if you want to call it that, to experience the evils of greed, selfishness, entitlement, and ruthlessness. I had to endure early on in my life the brutality, the violent side of our natures. And those were really precious gifts, counterintuitive, of course, at first blush, but they all started with my birthplace. I was born in Romania just as the Second World War started. And because my father worked for an oil company, an American oil company, the Nazi-sympathizing regime imprisoned him. And there he was for 3 years, as I was slowly growing up, living with my grandparents. He survived the war, and afterwards, he was on a trip to New York in 1947, along with my mother, to visit the headquarters of Esso International in New York City. It was supposed to be a 2-week trip, and we were in Bucharest, my hometown, living with our grandparents who were babysitting for us. But just at that moment, the Russians forced a communist takeover across the entire Eastern Europe. And shortly thereafter, my grandfather, who was a famous politician and a Romanian patriot, he was loved, adored, and admired by the people he had served for many decades. He was nearly 80 years of age. They arrested him as well and eventually murdered in prison. The Iron Curtain came down in Romania, and ruthlessness and tyranny took hold. No one could leave the country or enter the country without approval of the communist regime. In fact, no one in the smallest of village could leave the village without prior authorization from the authorities. That was the world of communist dictatorship. Had my father tried to return to Romania, he would have been killed. And to support my contention is the sad reality that in the early days of the communist regime, they rounded up some 300,000 leaders intellectuals, anybody who they thought could be a threat to the regime. They were political leaders, religious leaders, business leaders. It didn't matter. They got rounded up and killed. So we got separated again at this time from my parents. They were in New York. We were in Romania, and he went to live with my grandparents before he got arrested in Transylvania. Around the age of 10, I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I was around 10. I too was arrested by the Romanian secret police, and I was placed in hard labor, along with my 5-year-older brother and our grandmother. And as I reflect on this period of my life, I seem to almost transcend myself, looking down as if I was watching some kind of a movie. That's how it feels right now, that I hadn't seen but just not long ago. I see our new home. Our new home was a smallish room that was confiscated from some citizen's house. There were no furnishings in the room. Our bed, made out of fresh hay, took up about 1/3 of the area. And I can still sort of sense the smell of damp, fresh hay that kind of lofted off some farmer's land. And this boy, me, you know, I was kind of a skinny little runt, dressed in gray tunics akin to a prisoner's garb, headed for work. And it was almost always dark when I went to work, not only in the winters, because I had to be there before 6 o'clock in the morning. And a 10 to 12-hour day would follow. At first, this boy, that's me, had to go down into the sewers of the cities. And it was always cold and damp there, and the stench that was deeply embedded in my sinuses. And I can still sense the weight of the buckets of sludge that I had to carry, bent almost at 90 degrees, to fit in the underground passages. So a new life chapter began for my life, and the routine was repeating itself 6 days a week, except for Sundays when blessedly we slept pretty much throughout. As I grew bigger, I graduated to work above ground. I dug holes for electric poles around the city. And later, in the early mornings, around 5 a.m., I had another job. In the darkness of the night, of course, I had to turn off the lights in a region of the city. And I had to reach into a series of transformers to be able to switch the lights off. And it was really a city that was very poorly lit. They were trying to save on electricity. And so it was hard to even find a transformer, except that they emitted a buzzing sound and also a smell, an aroma that was akin to burnt rubber. So you knew as you were getting close to them. But the trick was, of course, very important to find the right switch. And unfortunately, the switch was in a different place in every one of the transformers, and you had to remember which it was. Because the switch had a wooden handle about 3 to 4 inches long, and if you didn't grab the wooden handle and your hand touched the exposed metal, you were slammed to the ground by the force of and the shock of the high voltage electric current. And sort of, I had anxieties most mornings going to work day after day, saying, remember, big guy, where to put your hands. So life went on, months and years passed, and you know, we had every reason to believe that this was going to be it for the rest of my life. There was not a glimmer of hope that was based on reality. Whatever hope I had was instinctive and intuitive, not because there was a glimmer of light to say, aha, this too shall end. But fate intervened in a most surprising and amazing way. A truly ghastly attempt by the Soviet and Romanian governments to get my parents in New York to spy for them backfires. What happened is that the Romanian and Soviet diplomats came to my dad and said, Mr. Georgescu, if you want to see your kids alive again, you're going to spy for us. So my dad went home. You can imagine the kind of night my father and mother had reflected on what just happened. But the following morning, my dad went to the FBI and said, look, I'm an American citizen because my mother and father became American citizens, knowing they could never return to communist Romania. So what should I do? And they said, why don't you become a double agent? And my father demurred. He said, look, I've seen that play before. It never ends well. Sooner or later, they will ask me to do something I can't do or I don't want to do. They'll kill the kids anyway. What's plan B? I'm not sure he used plan B, but that was the idea. And they said, look, why don't you, as two American citizens, go to the press and tell them the story that this was the height of the Cold War. You are being blackmailed with your children's lives, and this is a horrific thing. And the reason this may work is that the Russians at the time wanted to be perceived as civilized, as a better alternative than these dirty capitalist Americans. So they wanted to win the world over and the world's goodwill. So we think that the Russians will tell the Romanians they're not allowed to kill the kids. Well, it took courage, it took integrity, and faith, because that's what my parents did. And the story kind of went viral in whatever viral meant in 1953. But it was in most little towns in America. There was a story about the saga of the Georgescu boys. And one of the persons who read the story was an extraordinary woman, as later we found out. She was a woman from Cleveland, Ohio. She was an amazing woman. She happened to be one of the richest women in America in her day. She was a powerful force. As you can tell by the job she had, she was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee in Congress, a woman in 1953. She also happened to have been instrumental in getting President Eisenhower elected. So she went to work. Long story short, they sent a bunch of Russian spies back to Russia in return for our freedom. Now, I tried very hard much of my life to find out who those people were. I wanted to go to them and say, was it as good for you as it was for me? But in those days, apparently, they never kept records of such doings. So I don't know who they were. The only thing that I know for sure is that on April 13th, 1954, this 15-year-old boy and his older brother landed at Idlewild Airport, now Kennedy. Yes, I was still scrawny, clearly undereducated, and I hadn't a clue about English. But as it turned out, the fact that I had and still have had an overabundance of guardian angels surrounding me in my life, I managed to get the fine education that Ellen mentioned and to create for myself a normal life. But my lifespans also witnessed some other evil events, and I mean evil events with capital E. There was the Stalin Gulag, who killed over 30 million people. We know about the Holocaust and Pol Pot's killing fields in Rwanda and Darfur. And now we're witnessing in real time Syria, aren't we? And just south of the border, something that we don't know about, is Mexico. Since 2006, over 70,000 people, innocent people, have been killed in drug wars. And our hands are soiled. We spend over $50 billion every year, year in and year out, to pay for those drugs. And we sell the drug cartels all the money, all the guns, I should say, and ammunition they want to buy from us. So put it all together, you can appreciate my obsessive commitment to try to identify the source of all this evil, the power it has over us. And I created a hypothesis, which is detailed in the book. And my suggestion is that along with my personal life's journey and studies that I've done with evolutionary biologists like Paul Ehrlich and others, I suggest that our violence and ruthlessness and bullying and greed and deception and narcissism are instincts that we have acquired over some 7 million, yes, 7 million years that our ancestors experienced in the African plains. Because there, 7 million years ago, some geological catastrophe happened, and the primates, our ancestors, were forced to leave the trees and come and land on the ground and become bipedal. And there, hello, they found the most ferocious predators in the world, in the African plains. So what did they have to learn? They had to learn to be ruthless and cruel and mean and deceptive, because that's what it took to survive. And they had to face famines, because they also had to experience the kind of brutal summers and almost ice age cold winters. So they developed new instincts over time. Selfishness, narcissism, me first. Me first was critical. If I didn't take care of me, I was dead, I was gone. And hoarding was even better. The more resources I had, the better off I was. The more food I had around me, better chances for me to live another year. Now, these were amazingly, amazingly helpful instincts. And later on, when they used to form bands and tribes, if you will, searching for hunting and searching for food, you know, in the summers when the famines would increase, if they found other tribes that had food and they didn't, they'd kill them and take their food away. I'm just suggesting that's the world those people live for millions and millions of years, and those instincts are deeply ingrained in our DNA still, in our neurological system. We know that evolution happens mighty slow, glacially slow. It takes hundreds of thousands of years for us to evolve. And so many of those instincts are hanging around, maybe needlessly in our time, but there they are. Now, the point this evening is for me not to depress you, please. It is rather to try to understand the cause of this evil and where it came from. Because I believe that with this knowledge, we can be empowered to control these instincts and to keep them in check. Now, more importantly, we're also better than that. We're also caring, compassionate, loving people. And you all, and I very much at the top of the list, have experienced that. I saw it in my life, I saw it in my business world. And as an example for all of us, just to ground ourselves, we have seen in the outpouring of heroism and kindness and thoughtfulness when Sandy hit about a year ago. That devastating storm that hit not only New York City, but also neighboring states and the coastlines. And we witnessed thousands of people reaching out to total strangers. They sent food to them because they had none. And they said clothing because, as you may recall, the evenings were getting cold. And hundreds upon hundreds were taken into their homes because the stricken peoples had no other place to go. I see it at the New York Presbyterian Hospital where I work, when thousands of men and women have chosen to come to work every day to carry out their jobs with caring and compassion. They have chosen their life's work to help heal the body and the soul of those in pain, those who suffer, and those who need help. So, yes, we are clever as a species, we're inventive, we're kind, caring and loving and more. So now, basically, the point in my book is that now we have a choice to make, a choice on how to behave. We can resist the inherited evil instincts because we can realize that those traits that were acquired long ago really have become destructive in our lives today. The evil deeds have no useful purpose in our business, in our families, in our communities, or in our little united, interconnected global village. So perhaps it's time for us to consciously reject them. Instead, we seem today to be advertising them on television, on movies, on video games. There's a new video game today, apparently just broke all records. $800 million worldwide, around the world. And they say it's as violent or more violent than, I've forgotten the name of it, I heard it this morning on radio. Or if you open up your friendly newspaper, what do you see? A whole series of all the crimes and rapes and maims that happened the day before, and we are being brainwashed saying, that's who we are. And too many of us choose to believe that. But I suggest that all of these things can now be publicly condemned, that we have to say that they don't have any role to play in our politics, in our business, in our private life. Enough. Because our instincts don't decide for us, we choose. We get to decide whether we are happy or not. And I remember watching in an interview the actor Michael J. Fox. He looked at the camera and said, folks, I've got Parkinson's. Everything else I get to choose. An inspirational statement. And Google's slogan has it right. Do no evil. Instead, choose this amazing, kind, compassionate side of our natures. Because I think now we know that the only reality that matters is the reality that we can create for ourselves. And for me, the underlying purpose of For Mankind is to move the human conditions towards the good, which means that we increasingly have to care about the other in our lives and around us. We need to make their lives better and take away the emphasis from ourselves. Because that caring, that concern, that love for the other is the only thing that brings us success, true success and fulfillment. Now, a question could be asked, okay, can all this wonderful notion of positive transformation, can it really have a role to play in our everyday lives today? Can values and morals be part of our existence? If it does, the first critical step is to go back to the other. Because the other are our children, our family, our friends. They are the customers in our business world. They are we, the people, to our government. And love and compassion and joy and success can come only, as I said, from doing something good, something loving, something kind for somebody else, for the other. And simply eating metaphorical bonbons while looking admiringly at ourselves in the mirror just isn't going to cut it. I would say also that today our very democratic system is on trial. Our democracy is an extraordinary form of government, but in historical terms, it is a new experiment, one which bases its very existence on the balance between the role of the state and what I mean by that, the common good and the freedom and liberty for the individual. And at its very core, we the people accept that the other matters, that our individual rights are not absolute, and that's why we created the Bill of Rights in our very wise and vital and brilliant Constitution. Democracy can only work when we, the people, commit to care for one another and to support one another. Democracy can only work if we are tolerant of the rights of all diverse people or clans or parties or tribes or whatever you want to call it. And they have to be equally committed to the common good, committed to tolerance for all, whether it's religion, whether it's race, gender, sexual orientations. We are indeed meant to be equal under the law and under God. So the other matters in every aspect of our lives, whether it's business, politics, private life, community. And we have learned from history the hard lessons of tyranny and what happens when the balance tilts too far, gets out of kilter, let's say towards the state of power towards state power where the individual rights are diminished. And that's part of the life that I led as a child. And even in ancient Greece, the state had most of the rights in individual creativity and entrepreneurship were not appropriately valued and encouraged. But our American experiment in democracy requires this balance between the individual freedoms and the common good. In other words, we're free people to create and build the modern pyramids of our time. We're also people who have the right to equal opportunity to be the very, very best each and every one of us can be. And whenever the balance between these two critical dominions gets out of kilter and tilts too far one way and the other, we are in a crisis as we are today. So we must regroup consciously to make our choices on the good side of our natures. We need to care much more passionately about the others. We must rediscover the common good and simple common sense. In our human history, we have been blessed. We have been shown the light and how best to live our lives for thousands of years. These are the extraordinary illuminators of history, the amazing creatures that I kind of visualize walking around with lanterns along the road to progress for the human condition. Name them: Buddha, Confucius, Moses, Muhammad, Jesus, my personal hero who helped inspire me as a child because of what he said and how he lived his life. And in modern times, we've had others. We've had Lincoln and Gandhi and Mother Teresa and Martin Luther King and Mandela. So I'll conclude with a few observations. The wise man said, it's not what happens to you in your life that defines who you are. It is how you respond to what happens to you in your life that defines your character and your legacy. The second point I want to make is to share with you some good news, some really great news. And that's a new science of epigenetics. Now, what epigenetics says, very briefly, is that if you behave consciously in a certain way, let's say you behave as a good person, you not only become a better person spiritually and intellectually, you become a better person physiologically. Now, the magic that happens is that there's a bunch of molecules that sit on top of your genes, epigenes on top of your genes, that observe how you behave. And they say, hey, I'm going to try to help this person continue to behave in the way that they want to do. So if they see you behave in a good way, you become a better person. And the amazing thing is, and this is really incredible, that you can pass on these amazing genes to future generations. Now, this is new science. This has been talked about only for a couple of years, and it's for real. It's exciting news. But like with every other great discovery comes a responsibility. We can no longer say we can't change. We can no longer just shrug our shoulders. We cannot allow ourselves to believe that evil is just part of human nature and there's nothing we can do about it. Now we know that we can choose our path for the future. And once again, the only reality that matters in our lives is the reality that we create for ourselves. And finally, from everything I know, I am convinced that for us to reach the promised land of the city on the hill, it can only come through us. We are the vessels that can make the promised land ours. We have to make it through our action, through our decisions, through our constant choices. So it's up to you and me to choose the good, to become contagious. And there's a lot of work to do for us and for generations to come. And I'm optimistic because I see many in the younger generations do great deeds. They increasingly are becoming involved and engaged as citizens. And so they must be, because the future is difficult, complex, and challenging, It's also amazingly promising and amazingly exciting. But that is their karma, their destiny. And all of us with graying hair, we must face a new reality. Our job simply is not done. There's no retirement in that contract. We must switch off the apathy little switch. We must look at the world with fresh new eyes, with conscious awareness of the needs of the others. It starts with our families, because our children and our grandchildren need us. Values and moralities must be taught and reinforced. Good deeds, good behavior must be rewarded. And beyond family and friends, the opportunities for contributions towards the good in every domain of our lives abound. The young have the primary responsibility to create their own just and compassionate world. We, the older generation, must work to the end to leave behind a better, kinder place for them to inherit. We owe that to future generations. We owe that to the destiny for all mankind. And I'll end with one of my favorite quotes. It comes from Mark Twain. He says, "The two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you figure out why." I wish us all good luck. Thank you very much. Thank you. So, we are going to have some questions, comments, whatever you like. Raise your hand and go at it. Please.
Yes.
My former colleague.
Yes, Peter, it was a fascinating talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There's a lot of optimism rooted in your message tonight, and thank you for that. Do you have any thoughts on policies that would help manifest the optimism, in a way that's actionable, politics-wise or governance-wise, that would, that would help the people and the country get on a firmer footing as it relates to these points?
So the question was, do I, and I'm saying this for the recording camera, that do I have some comments to make on practical policies in politics, governance, whatever, to move ourselves in the directions that we're talking about? I think basically that's what you were asking. And I think yes, I do. I'll venture to say that we face many complex issues in this country. More jobs, sustainability, energy, education. Those are huge issues. But the good news is we know how to fix just about every single issue that confronts us. That's not the problem. We are creative, we're imaginative, we know how to fix our problems for ourselves, for the world. The challenge is, can we muster the will to do that? That's the problem. If we didn't know how to fix these things, that would be a different kind of a challenge, We'll be searching around the world for a group of bright men to go out and do it. Take education in this country. We know how to create superior education for everybody. There are case histories outside of the United States. The two most successful secondary educational countries in the world are Finland and South Korea. We know what they're doing. It's not magical, it's not difficult to do. We also know how to fix our problems in the north, south, east, west, rural, in the metropolitan areas, in areas of poverty. We know how to do that. And the reason I'm here tonight, and the reason not just me, many of us are talking about these kind of issues, is because we are not going to really get it done until we, the people, change. We have to do these things. We have to empower others to say, let's send to Washington the people who can do the right things, the people who can get together and look for the common good, the people with ideas who really care about what's happening to the country in the future. It's not about me, it's about us. That's what we have to do. And so I believe that the long-term future is not waiting for, Mr. or Miss President to come and tell us what we need to do. We know what we need to do. We need to get the will to act together, to collaborate together. This kind of nonsense that's going on today is crazy. We got to say stop to these guys. Get together, fix the problems. That's what has to happen. So I'm optimistic that we're going to see the light. I really am. I'm very hopeful. But I'm going to keep talking about it. Other question or comments? Please, ma'am.
Do you think that in the country today, we see many times that we're trying to disassociate ourselves many times from religion, in God we trust, or, whenever we happen to talk about anything to do with in the schools or whatever. Do you think that this is having any kind of impact on particularly the younger generation when they see and hear this kind of, activity?
Yes, I think the lack of spiritual awareness, understanding, concern is arguably at the top of the list of my concerns. The sad reality is that too many in our country don't have the resources, don't have the nourishment and the support that many of us have had growing up. And it starts with the family. At the end of the day, the family is the crux of the issue. Parenting, without doubt, is one of the most important things that we humans can do, is to nurture and support and give and empower the future generations to fly. And so the sense of morality, the sense of spiritualness, in order to love the others, you have to have an understanding that something bigger than we individually are. So, the sad reality is that the churches as an institutions have had problems. Folks have walked away from that. The Sunday school is not what it used to be in terms of the number of kids. The families don't often talk about morality and values. The school, God forbid, that you talk in the schools about ethics and morality and spirituality. That's a huge problem. So we got to fix all that. We don't even care about history anymore. We live in today, and that's why it's about me. Churchill said something to the effect that the further you look back, the better you are looking and envisioning the future. We don't look at the past. We don't want to learn from the past. God, let's relive every problem, bump into every wall that is possible in our lives. And that too has to change. So at the end of the day, education, by education I mean not only math, arithmetic, and a skill set, but also developing the full person, the spiritual person, a person with appreciation about the creative powers that we have, so we can become the full and live the potential of all of us as human beings. We know how to do that. It's all there to be had. We've got to choose to do that. So yes, I do. Other questions? Ma'am. I'll promise I'll repeat the question, which I didn't do before.
Warren Buffett was interviewed by News this morning. It was a meeting, and the question had to do with the disappearing middle class and what's going on in Washington. He was reminiscing that in World War II, beginning of the war in Washington, D.C., he was young, his father was there. He remembered there was a feeling of togetherness, everybody, goodwill, we had a purpose. And he hasn't seen that since. And he mentioned that, and repeated again, that he and Bill Gates and Melinda Gates are donating a considerable portion of their money to foundations to do some good. And they're trying to get other billionaires to do the same. And he mentioned, he asked the Rockefellers to hold a meeting in New York, bring in the billionaires, and convince them to give more money to foundations establishing some good. One couple said they don't know if they could do that. He said, I'll give you a guide on how to live very nicely on $500 million. That was his answer. We're trying to do something.
I don't know if you caught the sound of that. Do you need me to repeat the question? I don't think so. Okay, you know, I know about what Buffett, and I think we all know, it's been well publicized that Buffett and Gates and others have pulled their money, not some of their money, the vast majority of their money, almost all of their money is already being given. That's something to be applauded. There's something to be applauded. But the issue, I think the deeper issue is not about money. It's not. I mean, you know, a few billions here, a few billions there, add up to some, you can do a lot of good with that. But if we don't choose, again, I come back to the issue of what he said. He doesn't see the willingness to look for the other.
Goodwill since World
Exactly.
War II.
That's
There's such hatred out there.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, because when you're inwardly directed, when you become the central focal point of everything of import in life, that's where we end up. I'm going to dislike everybody else because it's not about them, it's about me. And that's what I was trying to say. We have some big problems in this country. This gap that he was talking about, the middle class, is gone. So you've got this 15 to 20%, that's about 60, 70 million people who are doing just fine, thank you very much. But there are 330 million people in this country, and they're not doing fine. And so that's what we have to, they're not doing fine spiritually, they're not doing fine economically, they don't have, the jobs aren't there. And it's not just our fault, it's where the world has gone. Technology, as I mentioned too briefly, technology and globalization have hurt. Manufacturing jobs are gone. So we have to train and retrain ourselves constantly to be part of the new future. We have to teach trades and skill sets as well as technology. And also the bottom line is we also have to teach ourselves to be good human beings. Because if we do that, there's no stopping America. We'll be the best or the brightest that the human condition has. We have the system, we have a democracy, we have an experiment that it's working, and we're trying to mess it up. So we got to stop doing that. And it all comes down again to a simple thing. What choices do we choose to make as human beings every day in our lives? You know, it starts not just with the big stuff, the little stuff. How I'm going to treat the next person, how I'm going to treat my kids and my grandkids and my friends and my neighbors and my colleagues in business. That's what makes the difference. When we do that, the jobs will be there, the creativity will fly, because we know how to do those things if we have the will to be good people. And that's the point. I like to have Mr. Buffett's money and Gates's money and all the rest of it. That's not going to fix the problem. We are the only way for us to get out of this mess. We the people. Ma'am.
Don't you think lack of community and the connotation of mental health, the lack of mental health in our society, that people are afraid to reach out sometimes to seek the assistance that they need? The other thing too is in 1982, the American Civil Liberties Union came along and said that we cannot incarcerate people against their will. So the disintegration of mental health institutions have come down. I think that there's a lot to do with the people being less empathetic to one another. Has a lot to do with it.
Yes.
Yes, we are less sympathetic about the other. This is your point is we're less sympathetic, less compassionate about each other. We're not reaching out to the mentally ill. That's the point you're trying to make, and that's exactly right. And that's what we have to, it is in our nature, you see, this is the point. We have to look inside of us and have the courage to allow this part of our beings to play, to be free, to reach out, to help, to be confident that my compassion is a way of life. This is back to what Mark Twain said. Why the heck are we here? Why are we here? There has to be a higher purpose in this life for each and every one of us that's simply trying to narcissistically feed our base instincts. Yes, we first have to have food and water and nourishment and all of that, but that's not enough. I think our purpose, and that's why I mentioned all those people, we've been told what to do. We have to be compassionate. We have to reach out. We got to help those people. Look, most of us are normal, whatever normal means, within a range of whatever, a couple of standard deviations from some average. But there are people who are mentally ill. There are people who are sick. There are people who are born with defects and all the rest of it. We're not a perfect species. There are many moving parts for all of us. Our parents get older. We're getting older. Our kids need help. All the rest of it. We have to live in a community, to your point, community, where we look out for each other. And we have to reinvent the family passionately and care about that, and care about the nearing community, and then care about this nation. What worries me is that we're becoming a country of renters. We want to rent America because, you know, there are good flicks in America, we got good fast food. Why not stick around for a while, you know? But do I have a responsibility to do something for this country and for the people around me? What's citizenship mean anymore? Come on, let's get real here. We have a role to play, a very critical role to play. And it's not all for the young, you know? I think the rest of us can give up because we're not leaving behind something so absolutely terrific for the younger people. So we can't give up now. Yes, ma'am.
I understand that you are the president of YNR.
I was, ma'am.
Or you were?
Yes.
Okay. Well, are you still in advertising?
No, ma'am, I'm not. I'm not in advertising. I haven't been in advertising for about a decade. I'm doing other things. I'm in different...
Advertising is a very powerful medium.
I agree with that.
And if anybody could help to give people in our country an incentive to do what you suggest tonight, it would be in advertising. For instance, some of the messages, like in the beginning of our country, there was a fellow who wrote common sense and things like that. And common sense is something what we won't need right now. For instance, like you said too, and everyone knows, the home and the school is where the seeds are planted and they grow. I know that when I was in school, there was a girl in our class that could lie and look you straight in the eye. And that was one of the worst things that could happen to a person. We said, now look at today, the lying, the cheating that goes on in school and in government and everything. The schools have got to bring back, if they don't want to call it religion, they got to call it ethics of how to behave toward your fellow man. And that's why I thought advertising, because I was in advertising many years ago, and I know how it can move the people.
Yeah, well, you're quite right. I'm not going to repeat what you've said, but it's wonderful. And I think, as I said, yes, all you have to do is turn on the television and look at a lot of politicians, and you see all the ugly things that you were talking about. And that has to be fixed. Morality has got to be fixed. Look, the point is, at the end of the day, we the people have to demand better advertising, we have to demand better movies, we have to demand the kind of video games that are not all about how vicious and killers and murderers we can be. And that's up to us to do it. And we vote we make those determinations. We vote who goes to Washington, we vote the kind of games that happen. If $800 million in the first week, that's a vote of confidence in how evil we can be. We got to change that.
You might want to describe what the Advertising Council does.
Well, there's an awful lot of good that the Advertising Council, Advertising Council is an organization that has been around for decades. I'm not exactly sure, I remember when it started, but 5 decades? 50. In the 50s? 50 years. And advertising people, advertising companies have gotten together and they do pro bono work on just about every conceivable good cause, from education to proper nutrition to anti-drugs, which is one of the biggest campaigns that the advertising business has put together, and by the way, has had effects. And it does have effects. So advertising people do a lot of what you're talking about. And so, yes, there are businesses. You see, this is the good news. There are people and businesses that really do a lot of what we're talking about. I'm not alone. There are lots of people, lots of organizations, lots of businesses, and we all have to keep the drumbeat rolling until there's a tidal wave, until we demand to have the kind of a world that we all want to have. That's why you're here. So that's why I'm optimistic. There's some young people here. You got to do it, man. That's your karma, and we got to give you a little better head start than you have right now.
Yes, our pastor has an answer to Mark Twain's question as to why we're here, and what he says is we are here to know God and to do His will.
Sounds good to me. You know, I think your pastor is very wise, and if you really look at almost every religion on the face of the earth, fundamentally at the core, they all say the same thing. It's about love, it's about compassion, and it's fundamentally the golden rule. Do unto others what you would have them do unto you. Every single religion. Confucius said that, Buddha said that, Moses said that. Every religion, whether you're Jewish religion or Christian religions, they're all in the Quran, it's all there. So we know, back to the point, we know what to do. So, gosh darn it, let's go do it. Let's go do it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I think he has set the bar high for our season, and it's a wonderful address specifically to the overall academic theme at Concordia this year, which is resilience. And I couldn't think of a better speech to that topic. But it was most inspiring, and I thank you very much.